Follow me into the mountains, where the air is thin and the population is scarce, a place where only those things who don't want to be seen can be found. Enjoy these allegedly true and scary stories from the mountains. Now let's begin. When I was young, my parents moved around a lot. I must have attended 10 different schools during my life. My dad was the kind of man who shouldn't have had kids. He wouldn't keep a steady job and forced my mother and later my aunt to work long hours to support our family, which included 6 kids. He was a schemer and always looking for an angle to work. My earliest memories were bar fights and my dad robbing my piggy bank while he was drunk in the middle of the night. My mom followed him like a god. To this day, I don't understand why. He was physically violent with her, and she stayed with him for over 20 years until all the kids had grown. I guess she stayed for us more than anything. The story actually begins when I was 10 years old. My dad outfitted an old school bus with bunks, and we traveled across the country from Utah to Indiana and finally to Kentucky, where the bus engine died. So the bus was our home for a long time until Dad finally rented what could only be described as a shack on the side of a mountain. This was near Burkesville in what is known as the Cumberland Gap, very mountainous with steep hills with gravel roads carved into the mountains. The house we rented was from an old man named Howard who owned a gas station and convenience store where 2 roads intersected. Howard was a good old man who took a liking to my dad. He used to give us the flat sodas from his gas station when we were waiting on the bus. For us, it was a very rare treat to drink anything more than water. There were 6 of us kids all together. Marty, who was just a baby, Michael, who was in kindergarten, my sisters Jean and Carol Ann, who were in 3rd, and my brother Jim, who was in the 2nd grade. I was the oldest in 4th grade. We would walk down a steep gravel road that was about a quarter of a mile from the house each day to the bus stop. I remember the gravel road was overgrown and had old houses that were dilapidated on both sides. The town had been part of the company housing for a coal mine that closed up back in the 50s. Kudzu and vines covered houses. Old trucks and cars that were no more than rust piles lined the sides of the road, looking out of the brush as if they were trying to hide. Howard called it the Coal Mine Road. The house we lived in was at the top of the hill from the gas station, then about a quarter mile down Coal Mine Road on the right. It was the only house not grown over with kudzu and weeds. The road kept going to a clearing where Howard had an oil rig. I remember there were copperhead snakes, and we'd keep ourselves at the center of the road so no one would get snake bit. Sometimes they would come out onto the gravel and warm in the sun, especially early in the morning. We would throw gravel at them to keep them back. We were warned never to venture off the path because Howard had told us that there were hidden dangers all around. Old cellars that had caved in, uncovered wells, and of course the snakes. Mom was very careful to keep us all near or in the house as much as she could, but being the oldest boy, I would be sent out to get coal from a coal pile. A pot-belly stove was all we had for heat. It was a chance to goof off and look around, throwing old rocks at the windows of those old houses I could see through the woods. One day, Mama asked me to go out and bring in some coal. I was watching TV on a black and white TV set in the bedroom, and I didn't want to get up. So I acted like I didn't hear Mom ask. She finally came in the room fussing and said that if I didn't get the coal right now, it would be dark. So out I went. We had an old wheelbarrow that we used to bring the coal up to the house. Then we'd take a few large pieces in and put them beside the stove. For those of you who don't know, coal is very dirty and it gets all over you. The old wheelbarrow had a steel wheel that needed grease and would squill as you pushed it down the road and over to a pile of coal that Howard had brought out for us to keep warm. In a lot of ways, I think Howard worried about us in that old drafty house. This was sort of his way of helping. It was already dark when I shoveled the last of the coal into the wheelbarrow and turned toward the house. Then I saw something. On the road past our home, there was a light. It was dim like an old lantern. Dad wasn't home that I knew. He was working at a blue jean factory 4 hours away, and he wouldn't be home until Friday. The light bobbed as it came slowly up the road, like someone walking. There was nothing down that road now. No reason for anyone to be coming up from the old oil rig and coal mine. And if it was Howard, he would have taken his truck instead of walking. And yet here it was, a dim yellow light that seemed to keep a steady pace toward me. I gave the wheelbarrow a push. Then I stopped. If they didn't know I was here now, that would have told them. I dropped the handles of the wheelbarrow and made a run for the house, hoping I could beat the lantern carrier. As I ran the 100 yards or so to the house, the lantern grew closer, but kept its steady pace, not pausing. I could see it was a lamp, flickering with a very dirty, dusty glass cover. I could make out a single person in the light of the lamp as it swung at the end of the arm, walking ever closer to me and my home. I burst through the door of the house and yelled, "Mama, there's someone out there on the road, behind the house." Mom came out of the kitchen and came to a halt just inside the living room. There was no doubt, based on my face, that I'd seen something. I wasn't overly afraid of the dark, and Mom knew that. I didn't spook easily, and she knew I was usually the one who got rid of the snakes and defended the younger kids from bullies. She said in a calm voice, "Lock the door." I ran back to the front door and shut it quickly, not taking time to look for the lantern. I turned the old deadbolt lock and a homemade wooden lock we had made with a nail and a flat piece of wood. Mom came into the living room with a single 16-gauge shotgun. Her dad gave her that gun, and that may be the only reason we still had it, because she refused to let Dad sell it. By this time, the other kids were coming into the room. She told them in a hushed voice to go to the bedroom and lock the door. It must have been the tone of her voice, because they did exactly that. I could hear Marty crying behind the door and my oldest sister hushing him. She walked around cutting off lights. The kitchen, the hall where the potbelly stove was, the living room. The house had those old string lights to a single bulb. So as each light went out, the house grew very dark. The only light was the light of the porch light and the light from under the bedroom door. Mama began to peek out the windows. First, she looked out the kitchen window. The back door was locked, I could see. She peeked out the small window in the door then, and then the living room windows, then the bathroom. Nothing. She turns to me and asks, "Are you sure you saw someone?" I answered quickly, "Yes, they had a lantern and were walking up the road." From the mine? She was looking at me intently with a furrowed brow now, her voice raised like she was questioning the information. "You better be telling me the truth," she responded flatly, rechecking each window. I was hurt and at the same time angered by her lack of belief. I then started checking the windows myself, but I didn't see anything either. Finally, Mom opens the front door and steps out on the porch. She goes to the edge and looks up and down the road. I peeked out from behind her and didn't see anything either. The moon was above the trees now, and you could see clearly there wasn't anyone on the road. I guess it would be easy enough to turn off the lantern and slip into the woods, but why? We didn't have any kind of flashlight, so we had to just strain our eyes and see what we could. Nothing moved, no noises came from the woods, but we could hear the other kids bumping around in the bedroom. We went back inside and shut the door. She put the shotgun in the corner by the door and looked at me with surprising compassion after such a scare. "Maybe we have enough coal for the night." She smiled at me. "I really saw something, Mama." I once again insisted. "Maybe it was Howard. We'll ask him in the morning." She walked back to the kitchen, leaving me standing by the door. The next morning, I woke to a very cold house. No one else was up, but the fire had burned down to cinders, and there wasn't any more coal in the house. I got up, slid on my pants and shoes. I went to the front door and saw the shotgun was still in the corner by the door where Mama had left it the night before. I peeked out the living room window. Everything that had happened the night before returning fresh to my memory. Unlocking the front door, I opened it and I looked outside. My mouth dropped open. The wheelbarrow filled with the coal I had loaded the night before was now just sitting on the porch. Someone had taken the wheelbarrow to the house and up the 5 steps to the porch without anyone hearing it. One more thing. Sitting on top of the coal was an old kerosene lantern. I poked my head out into the brisk air. I thought it was cold in the house until that frosty October morning met my bare arms and face. I looked up and down the old road and around the house. No sign of anyone. I brought in a couple of pieces of coal and started up the fire. We never did find out who my mystery helper was. We found out later that day that Howard had been out of town at a doctor's office in Versailles, and Dad didn't come home until later that Saturday afternoon. Howard said it looked like one of the old lanterns in an old storage shed near the entrance of the mine. Dad, Howard, and I walked out the road the next day. I remember I had a hard time keeping up. It was so grown over. Howard toted an old black revolver, and Dad had Mom's shotgun. First we went to the old shed. The door was bolted, and the padlock was rusted beyond opening. We then traipsed through the tall weeds and kudzu until dark, checking each of the old houses, but they were all still boarded up. There were no signs of entry, except for some broken-out windows that were probably from my rocks. From that day forward, I went out early to get the coal, with the exception of a few really cold nights. Those nights I did venture out after dark. I took my lantern. Story number 2. If anyone's ever seen the Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia before, it's the exact area where this event occurred. I literally had to drive by their house on the way. Hank Williams III also wrote a song about it, called Boone County Blues, which really captures the essence of the depressing, drug-consumed area. I worked as a lab technician for an independent company. I would run analyses on coal samples to determine the quality, BTUs, ash, sulfur, things of that nature. Part of the job was driving company pickup trucks to various different coal mines, train loadouts, and the river docks to draft barges and collect samples. We got a call at around 2 a.m. to go pick up a train sample over in an incredibly remote area. The mine was miles away from absolutely anything. In order to get there, I had to drive across a place called Williams Mountain, home of Jesco and all the other whites. It's a notoriously steep, curvy, and dangerous mountain with a very high rate of accidents. I made it to the mine and collected the sample without incident. After about 15 minutes of driving, I started back up the steep mountain. Having made the trip numerous times, I could take the curves pretty fast, especially when it's pitch dark and you can see headlights approaching you. The nearest stoplights, stop signs, or streetlights are a good 30 miles away, so it's a different kind of dark. The complete darkness just perfectly compounds the isolation. It was because I was driving so fast that I was completely caught by surprise when it appeared that there was a vehicle quickly catching up to me. I started to speed up, but before I knew it, they had caught up with me. When they got close, they turned on their high beams. I could tell it was a truck from the height of the lights, but the bright lights had me somewhat blinded. It was then when the terror really began. They started edging closer and closer until they were right up my rear. It didn't matter how fast I went, they stayed right on me. All of a sudden, they just stopped in the road and killed their headlights. Completely weirded out and rattled, I took a huge sigh of relief and began laughing nervously as they dropped from sight, thinking it was just someone's idea of a cruel joke. Never had I been so ready to see that city skyline. Not too long after, and to my complete and utter horror, the lights began quickly climbing the mountain once again. Frantic, I punched the gas, almost wrecking twice trying to flee, but it was no use. Again, the bright lights filled up my mirrors and simultaneously filled my heart with fear and absolute dread. They would back off some, then get extremely close, repeating this over and over and over until they finally rammed me twice. The second time was hard enough to make me swerve, though thankfully I was able to ride it out. I should note there is absolutely nowhere to pull off while traversing the mountain. Just guardrails on either side, and drop-offs wherever the rails are missing. There's only one little church on a wide spot on the side of the road, so I tried to pull over and let them pass. I put on my signal and turned off, but my pursuers turned off as well and killed their lights. I hid my vehicle and ducked down, trying to watch out for any movement. Nothing. 2 or 3 minutes probably goes by and I made my move, frantically peeling out. To my unimaginable relief, they did not pull out too. But I wasn't convinced it was over. Sure enough, the lights approached once more, though this time it was accompanied by a sound, an unmistakable, gut-wrenching sound of gunshots. I'd heard the term hyperventilate, but at that moment, I discovered the full force of its meaning. Only able to breathe, I ducked down as low as I could and began reciting a nonsensical plea for help. This was before cell phones were popular, but to this day, service there is non-existent. The bullets rang out like a soundtrack for my misery, and all I could think at that moment was that I never would see my loved ones again. Time is truly subjective. It felt as though I was on that mountain for days, but I finally reached the end. I eventually saw a few houses and immediately pulled into the first place I could. The truck didn't turn down the driveway, but lingered in the road with the headlights off. After a couple of minutes, a porch light came on, and the truck did a donut, starting back up the mountain. A man emerged from the home, but I left as soon as the truck's lights were out of sight. I yelled, "Sorry," out the window, and drove like a reckless lunatic the rest of the way. I ended up getting pulled over for speeding on the interstate. I didn't even attempt to explain, as I figured it was a small price to pay, all things considered. Obviously, I never entertained the idea of ever making that run again, and my boss began collecting samples in the daytime only for that particular site. The mountains of West Virginia are incredibly beautiful, but there's also a lot of danger lurking in the depths of their remote isolation. Places that inspire movies like Wrong Turn. Places where no one can hear you scream. Story number 3. I used to work for a motorcycle company in a very rural province of the Philippines. Unlike other places, my home island has only one city for now, and that's where our main office is located. My job at the time was as a field representative, but I mostly handled the collection of monthly payments from our customers. Most of our customers live in various secluded areas near the shorelines, mountains, and vast forests, hence why I was required to go collect their payments. More often than not, they supposedly forgot their monthly due dates, so it's up to me to remind them. I'm only a 5'6" tall guy, but I'm not skinny like my other coworkers. And before joining the company, I was an avid mountain biker and hiker because I was raised in a very far-off farm with no electricity or motorized transportation. Anyway, because of my nature, the office always puts me in charge of going to the most mountainous areas covered by woods. I didn't really complain at first. All these places that I had to go to were very secluded to the point that even electricity is non-existent, and people there live as if it's the Middle Ages. One of these days, I started off early, since I had to ride a motorcycle provided by the office as a means of transport. This motorcycle was clunky, old, and had had more repairs than a World War II war machine, but I trusted it enough that I called it Ox, because no matter how hard or impassable the terrain was, it had never let me down before. But I do have to repair Ox while on the way every now and then, but nothing major. As I reached the foot of the mountain, I prepared a bit by checking my gas, inspecting Ox, and waterproofing my everyday carry stuffs. I never leave home without a knife, and on cases like these, I always brought one of my large blades. I revved up Ox, and we started to tackle this steep dirt road used by large trucks heading up the mountain. My client for the day was a tribesman who worked in a mine, and it always takes me 2 hours to get to the top of the mountain where his village is situated. The path there was very hard, and I was the only one who was able to get to the area. There were no houses along the way, just vast, deep woods all around. Usually in places like these, I would hear the typical rainforest sounds every time, but that day was different. I stopped for a while and had my breakfast on the side of the road. Ox was parked on a grassy part, while my food and hot coffee were placed on top of the gas tank and seat. While I took a sip of my hot drink, I heard what seemed to be giggling sounds behind me. It was almost as if children were playing nearby. I looked around but saw nothing, so I ignored it, thinking it was a bird. When I bit into my food, I heard it again. Something felt off, because the surroundings fell silent, and all I heard was the giggling getting closer from behind. I packed my stuff and unlocked the pin, holding my knife. I know I sound like a coward, but I'd experienced the paranormal since childhood, and sometimes it can get physically dangerous. I relaxed a bit, trying to focus to where the sound was coming from. I thought about this giggling sound and figured it could be two things. One, just a playful spirit teasing me, 2, it could be a bad one that follows you home so it can torment you for life. My grandparents told me that I needed to be respectful towards such beings, but I should never show weakness nor fear. I pulled out my 14-inch blade and took a stance, as if I was ready to strike whatever would jump out of the woods. The ordeal lasted for about 5 minutes. It was quiet. I could hear my heartbeat and breathing. Then I spoke in a very serious tone, stating, "Sorry if I disturbed you. I'm just resting, and I'll be on my way now." It was still silent, and after a few seconds, the normal forest sounds returned. The area felt somewhat the same again. I said thank you, and I went on my way. I made it to the small village consisting of no more than 25 houses. I made it to my client, and he offered me coffee. I got his payment, which was 3 months due. While resting a bit, I recalled what happened. My client suddenly asked me if I encountered any other problems along the way. I said there was nothing else, but I asked why. He told me that one of the villagers died not too long ago. It was very sudden. One day that villager changed and acted odd, becoming paranoid for seemingly no reason, shouting in the middle of the night and running away to God knows where. He went missing for days and was found dead under a tree. The elder shaman said the poor man was haunted by an evil spirit, and it took his soul. The man was never a brave one to begin with, and was easily scared by anything. I thought about what my client said and bid him farewell. I rode down the mountain and passed the spot where I rested and had no other issues. I went home exhausted and dropped onto my bed. I remembered the events that happened and thought about what I encountered back there. Was it the same evil spirit? Did I have a standoff against it and prevail? I had no idea, but I knew for sure that with my line of work, it would not be the last time that I'd encounter such incidents. Story number 4. This story happened when I was 12 or 13. I was getting off at my usual bus stop at about 4:30 p.m. in the evening. From there, I had an 8-minute walk down a sort of long, cracked road. Where I lived was a new housing development, and because of this, on my left side of the road was pure swamp and dense woods, while on my right there were a few houses here and there. As I was walking home, I felt this unease, as if I was being watched. Now, to be honest, I did get this feeling a lot when I was in or near the woods, so I blew off the feeling, chalking it up to me just being scared. At most, it was just some territorial forest animal watching me. As I continued, the feeling of being watched never left. I was about 70 yards from my home when I heard it. The sound of something walking in the woods, leaves and branches breaking underneath heavy feet. It sounded as if the creature was following me while using the forest as cover to not be seen. So I stopped in my tracks to see if I could see anything in the forest, to see what or who was walking around, but I saw nothing at all. I thought maybe it was all in my head, but as soon as I began walking again, that thing in the woods started to walk as well. So I stopped walking once more, and it stopped. Then I started walking again, and it started. This creature was following me and walking the same pace as me, stopping when I stopped and walking when I walked. I found this quite odd, but this seemed to be as if the creature was stalking me. It was watching me, but why? Was it making sure I didn't approach it or come anywhere close to it? Suddenly I saw a small rock flying at me. Not sure what to do, I picked the small rock up and threw it back into the woods. I wanted to see how the creature would react. Would it run away, or would it follow me still? But nothing happened. No sounds of running or walking occurred. Assuming the creature was still there, I hurried the rest of my way home into the backyard where my father was to tell him about my experience. After telling him and my younger brother about the experience, I also went to tell my younger neighbor about it. Together we decided we'd go into the woods to see if we could find what we all now thought was a Bigfoot. My dad and I loved watching mountain monsters, so we decided we'd do what they did when hunting for a supposed Bigfoot. We grabbed a big stick and hit a tree with 3 large hits. Nothing at first, so my dad hit the tree 3 more times. That's when he yelled at us that he saw something behind a big fallen tree trunk. At first we thought he was seeing things until I saw a dark figure behind that trunk. It had thick, dark brownish fur. The creature was huge, very huge, even though it was crouched. Wanting to catch its attention, I picked a thicker branch and slammed it into a tree 3 times. For a minute it was quiet. Then my dad yelled to run. We listened and came bustling out of the forest to the neighbor's house. Safe and out of the woods, I asked my dad, "Why'd you tell us to run?" He calmly tells me that when I wasn't paying attention, the creature behind the fallen trunk began to rise and stand up. My dad, not wanting to be there any longer, had us run. I don't know what would have happened if we stayed there longer. I love going in the woods, and I still do. But this encounter is one of the many encounters from the woods that is still burned into my memory. A reminder that the forest hides more than just coyotes and bears. It can hide much bigger and scarier creatures that you really don't want to ever encounter. It can hide much bigger and scarier creatures that you really don't want to ever encounter. This brings us to the end of today's episode. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like button, leave a comment, press the notification bell, and subscribe to our channel. And we will see you in our next story.